Hey there, I'm Amy Pattee Colvin, and I love thinking about and talking about and sharing ideas around energy flow in the body. I frame it as qigong and compassion for self, for others. And I'm here with my friend Heather, who will introduce herself in a minute. And we're just having a series of spontaneous conversations that we wanted to share with you.
My name's Heather Scott, and I have an area of interest that I feel complements Amy, and that is that I care very much about people taking care of themselves in important ways so that when they're nurtured, they can go out into the world and feel fantastic and make an impact. And so we're having these conversations because we have different topics that we've discussed before, and we're going to explore them here.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and dive into today's conversation.
Fantastic. Have I shared with you my concept where I was chatting with a friend and we talked about how you do less for more?
A little bit, but tell me more.
Yeah. So it came to my mind when you were sharing about how the first video was really basic.
Yeah.
Back to the basics, very simple, very straightforward, nothing, no like sha sha sha. Like it wasn't, let's do a back bend. Like it was, let's stand and breathe and get present to the stillness or whatever it was. And I just think that this feels like the year for less for more because, and I'm going to use an example from the Scotland trip that I was on with you. It was a beautiful trip in that I felt so grateful that you had gone and picked all these highlights for me. So I just got to say, hey, Amy, can you share your itinerary with me? Because I'm thinking about Scotland and I'd like to know what areas we're going to or whatever it was. And you had, I mean, when people say, where did you go in Scotland? I'm like, all over, like really covered it. But there was such a nice balance. And it's sometimes that less is more. So there were some people who were like, well, we didn't get here or we're not going there or whatever. And honestly, I don't think those are your people because you curated something so lovely. When describing that trip, I've often said the most important, the only thing I needed to know was when to have my luggage on the bus. And I knew we'd be going amazing places that day. So I think that there's a trend, and maybe I'm speaking it because this is what I want, is that less for more. So me saying less actually might give more value.
Mm.
Less in the daily regime might allow for more revelations or reflection. And I really love that.
Well, and I also think that with today's society where we have perpetual stimulus coming in, whether it be, social media, whether it be 24/7 news, so on and so forth, that we've become so tuned in to having our spidey senses going that we forget what it's like to just be settled and be still. And that I may have shared with you, that was one of the most amazing things about going to a spa last weekend where I had 4 hours of just hanging out with me and no devices were allowed into the complex at all. And how for the first 15 minutes, it's like, oh, this feels really weird. Because I didn't want to talk to anybody. My intention was to go and not talk to anybody and not listen to anybody. But I'm like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? Should I be thinking about something? It's like, well, no. Should I be meditating? Well, maybe. But, within a fairly short period of time, I recalibrated and got settled into the joy of nothingness, the joy of less, which really had a positive impact for more in me on that day. And I think moving into this new year.
Yes. And I would share that I have experienced in the last week or so the need to apply a number of moments of self compassion because I have completely geared down. I've had a few little interactions. I met with a friend for dinner on New Year's Eve. Like, here and there, I'm connecting to people. Um, but I've done very little this past week intentionally and to the point of discomfort for myself a few times where I'm like, maybe, maybe I'll just throw in a load of laundry or maybe I'll just such and such. No, I kept stepping back from the shoulds
Mm.
and this is a perfect time to get ahead on such and such. No, I've really embraced the stillness of the season and the hibernating bit. And it's been cooperative because it's been very cold and snowy here. And I think for me, that is just so, I don't know, like I said earlier, like it's not like a parade or, a huge backbend, but it's actually so nurturing for me. And it's such a good choice for me. And it's surprising to me a number of bits about that. It's surprising to me that it takes so much effort to just gear down. It it takes effort to not listen to my brain who has a lot of opinions on, well, you could just do this or what about this or you should and da da da. No, it's been so I've thought about this conversation in anticipation a few times. I'm like, oh, look, I'm doing it again. I'm applying like a kind, caring attitude toward myself because if somebody else told me the story of, well, I don't have that much on and I think I might gear down between Christmas and New Year's, it's like the perfect time to do that. And so why would that even be a dilemma? I would fully support anybody else who was doing it.
Well, and to me, that's a real illustration of self-care. And the only way, from my perspective, the only way you allowed yourself to step into that place of self-care where you geared down is because you have self-compassion. So
Agree.
let me talk about the idea of compassion just for a second. I know you've heard this many times, but
Oh,
for
awesome.
anybody who is new to the idea of compassion, the definition that I like to use came through a program called Compassion Cultivation Training. And when I studied at Stanford University to be a facilitator for this training program, because it was built at Stanford, this is one of the best takeaways for me from that program. And it's the idea that compassion has three parts. And the first part is awareness or of distress or suffering in some way. So your desire to just gear down, there must have been some sort of driver behind that. And we can talk about that in just a little bit. But awareness of something. And then the second step is being emotionally moved by that awareness. So the reality is we can't be aware of distress and suffering around us all the time, but we lock into something. And then when we're emotionally moved by whatever it is that we've locked into, that's where the empathy begins to come in. And that's the second step of compassion. But the third step, and this is the gold, is taking action. And so in your case, it was gearing down. And so often people perceive taking action with doing more. So this really ties in with your concept of doing less for more. And I mean, what a beautiful form of self-compassion, a beautiful form of self-care that really turns into when it's the right season to do it.
And there's an aspect of self trust that has to play into that too, because that was what the dialogue was. The internal dialogue is, well, I actually had one moment where I was like, I've geared down for 3 solid days now. Do I remember how to gear back up? Because, there's often things that I need to be productive on or take care of. And once I get into that fully geared down mode, I think I get a little jumpy of I do remember how to activate. Okay, yes, I do. Okay. I don't need to activate right now.
Defining compassion in this way, it's not like, oh, it's self-pity. When, oh, I need a little pat on the back. When. It's like, no, I want to be a healthy, thriving, successful, dynamic, vibrant human being, and the only way I can do that is when I take care of myself first.
Yes.
And one of the things that I love about practicing self-compassion, practicing compassion in general, and I've heard this from students over and over and over again as I've taught compassion training to them, is that having self-compassion allows you to set boundaries. And going back to that less for more, going back to that gearing down, you had enough self-trust to be able to set the boundary of, I'm going to gear down now. And
Mhm.
even if your peers or your loved ones were like, what are you doing? You've got laundry to do. You've got shopping to do. You've got financial stuff to take care of. You can still go, meh, I'll do that next week.
So, one of the questions that I prepared, and you've kind of spoken to it, but I'm going to ask anyway, just to see if there's more, is why do you think that self compassion is important?
Because if we don't have self-compassion, we turn into a giant pile of goo. It is not sustainable. And I lived that. I mean, I grew up as a classic people pleaser and I gave and gave and gave and gave. And what that turned into for me was situational depression. And the only way that I got out of situational depression was through having the courage to sit with myself. I'd received some guidance from a meditation instructor to do a certain thing, which required me to sit with myself. And I remember at one point, during that particular weekend retreat, she said, "Do you have any questions?" I go, "Well, yeah, I don't want to do this." And she's like, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Because I feel like I'm at the edge of the deepest situational depression yet, and I don't want to do it again. I don't want to go there." And she goes, "Look, you have new tools. You have this new tool that you've just been given, and if you use it while you sit with yourself, you will move through that depression faster. You will move through it and become stronger." And going back to your notion of trust, you have to trust that it's worthwhile. And so to me, that, self-compassion is essential because without it, if you enjoy engaging with others and if you enjoy being a person of service, you're going to fry out and you're not going to be able to support anybody, including yourself. And as you said earlier, I mean, it's so much easier for most people, for many people, to treat their loved ones better than they treat themselves. If you had a loved one who was having a bad day, you'd go, "Oh man, I'm really sorry you're having a bad day." Yeah, it makes sense to relax. It makes sense to do whatever it needs to do to take care of yourself. If you yourself are having a bad day and yet you've got a to-do list this long, you go, pff, I don't care that I'm having a bad day. I have to push forward anyway. I mean, how many of us do that, right? We all do at one point in time or another.
I think that society wise, there's a lot of positive reinforcement for pushing through despite not having the energy. When you were sharing just a moment ago about the situational where you finally sat with yourself, what I was present to is the fact that you brought self compassion to yourself in that moment because you became aware of it, even if you didn't feel comfortable with it. You were emotionally involved because you didn't want that other experience. And then you took action.
Right.
So, yeah. I also, I'm kind of curious when you have so much experience with this, what would you say, and you've touched on it already, but just to sort of put it in the this, and this form, what are, say, the top three or four direct benefits of practicing self compassion?
Hmm, that's a great question.
You touched on sustainability. We're human. We have to drink water in order to keep going, kind of thing. So,
Right. So certainly self-compassion, in order to remain a healthy, vital human being, I think self-compassion is integral to that. I also think that self-compassion contributes to a sense of connection with spirit. And through that also a connection to intuition. So if you are spiritually inclined and you have an idea of, the spirit that lives within you, whether you call it the higher self, the divine self, the God self, the Jesus self, having self-compassion helps you connect more deeply with that because self-compassion also allows you to have the courage to sit with yourself. Now, if you are not spiritually inclined, you could reframe that as the spark that makes you unique. Sitting with yourself in this process of being self-compassionate helps you connect to that spark that makes you unique. And those things also allow you to connect with your intuition, which again, I think, and early on in our conversation, we were talking about how, especially as entrepreneurs, it's easy to get locked into these days. Oh, this is what this professional thinks I should be doing. This is what this coach thinks. This is what this mentor thinks. And it's easy to leave the intuition to the side. And I think that practicing self-compassion has helped me connect more deeply with my intuition so that I can make decisions from there and not beat myself up about it and not question them. I think maybe that's another thing is that self-compassion over, I've really been focusing on it, like using that definition for the last decade. And I had been studying compassion meditation for another 20 years before that. But in the last decade, it is really when that definition settled in for me. It allows me to really deeply trust in what I'm doing and have the confidence to say, I like me. And as a human being, I am going to make massive mistakes or even small mistakes. And even when I make those mistakes, what can I learn from it? How can I move on? I'm not going to ruminate about it. I'm just going to keep going forward. And I think that's a big component as to why I was able to let situational depression go, is because I like me and I don't have a sense of judgment around whatever it is I do. I mean, I'm aware of it and I'm really willing to honor when I've made mistakes, but I use that as an opportunity for growth rather than an opportunity to beat myself up.
mhm. So there's a freeing up of energy that could potentially be locked in the rumination,
Yeah.
where when you apply self-compassion, you're actually like enlivening yourself because you're not stuck or going over that or the visual of hauling a bag of bricks or whatever it is behind us. And I think that when I was growing up and through my experiences, I've had times where I think I was taught that you have to go back and like learn all the lessons. And there's this saying about when you're driving, you mostly look through the front windshield and you glance in the rearview mirror just to check in, just to be aware. But it's not like you drive forward while looking backward. And I've been really experimenting with, is it okay for me to just let it go? Is it and I think it's quite a bit of self-compassion to just say, that happened and I get a chance to choose what I look forward toward creating or look forward to experiencing and what am I actually going to choose in this moment? Because I think it's I think it's an old habit that many people have to just carry that brick around and refer to it and in my experience I've talked to some people where they refer to the brick as the reason that they can't move forward. And
Oh,
I I've watched that, and and that kind of goes to everybody's at their own stage, and of course that's fine. And but I really love what you highlighted for the benefits of compassion, because connecting to self and building self trust, and honoring the fact that we all need to have a sustainable way forward. You know, I appreciate you sharing about the people pleasing, because the people pleasing in the short term is really easy, because that person needs that, you just give it to them. So there's this interim time where when you stop saying yes to people, there's a lot of discomfort, because they're used to you saying yes, not no. I've noticed.
yeah. And I was teaching a 6 week compassion class, oh, last fall, and that exact same thing came up for one of the students where one of her family members was so used to her saying yes, and it was no longer serving the student anymore to say yes, that when she had the courage to practice saying no or not saying anything, ooh, that changed the dynamic in that relationship. And so it takes courage
It
to have
does.
self-compassion. And, I didn't highlight it specifically, but to me, underlying self-compassion is self-awareness and self-appreciation. So you have to have a level of self-awareness. And then once you're aware of self, then you need to be able to appreciate that self you've become aware of. And sometimes you have to have self-compassion to be able to appreciate self, but I really think they kind of flow together. But it's really hard to practice self-compassion if you have no self-awareness.